John and Emily Thompson, along with their kids, Lily 8 and Max 10, had been living in a small 2-bedroom apartment in the city. It was always noisy and crowded, and they barely had enough space. So they decided it was time for a change. They wanted a place where they could have more room, where the kids could play outside, and most importantly, a place they could call their own. After weeks of searching, John stumbled upon an old house just outside the city. It was big, with enough rooms for each of them, and then some. The best part? It was surprisingly cheap. The day they went to see the house, they noticed it was at the end of a quiet street surrounded by thick woods. The house itself had a certain charm to it, with its big front porch and an old-fashioned weather vane on the roof. But it also felt a bit eerie. The paint was peeling off in places, and some windows were boarded up. The garden was overgrown, with wild vines crawling up the walls. The house was creepy yet charming, definitely dated, a stark contrast to their cramped apartment. Even though it hadn't been updated in years, John saw this as an opportunity. He was excited about renovating it, turning it into their dream home. As they walked through the house, Emily couldn't shake off a weird feeling. It was like the house was hiding something, holding secrets in its creaky floorboards and dusty corners. The rooms were spacious, but the light seemed to struggle to get through the old stained windows, making everything look dim and shadowy, or maybe it's holding hidden secrets. John was already talking about knocking down walls, opening up spaces, and replacing the old windows. He was full of ideas and energy. But Emily was less enthusiastic. She tried to be positive for the sake of the family, but deep down, something about the house made her uneasy. It wasn't anything she could put her finger on, just a gut feeling that something wasn't right. Lily and Max were excited about their new rooms. Lily was already planning how she would decorate hers, and Max was thrilled to have a nearby forest to play in. They didn't seem to notice the strange atmosphere of the house. As they left the house that day, heading back to their apartment, Emily looked back at it. The house stood there, silent and imposing, as if watching them leave. She wanted to be happy about their new home, but she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. Little did they know, their life was about to change in ways they couldn't even imagine. The Thompson family had finally moved into the old house. Boxes were scattered everywhere, and the sound of unpacking filled the once silent rooms. Despite the chaos, there was an air of excitement as they began settling into their new home. After a few nights, as John was about to say goodnight to Max, it was their nightly routine. He entered Max's dimly lit room where Max waited under his blanket. John can tell there was something unusual about Max tonight, but couldn't put his finger on it. Max was lying in bed, a wide, frightening grin on his face. It was so out of character for the usually cheerful boy that it sent a shiver down John's spine.
"You okay, buddy?"
John asked, trying to sound casual. Max nodded, the grin never leaving his face, and then said in an eerily calm voice, "Daddy, check for monsters under my bed." John, though slightly amused, humored Max's request. As he bent down to look under the bed, his heart skipped a beat. There, pale and frightened, was his real son whispering,
"Daddy, there's someone on my bed."
After the horrifying discovery under Max's bed, John's heart pounded in his chest. He whispered,
"Max, come out slowly."
Max's small hands were trembling, his eyes wide with fear. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he silently nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. A loud scream filled the room. The ghostly figure was screaming at them as they left the room quickly, Max clinging to his father in terror. Once they were safely away, John knelt down to Max's level, his voice low and serious.
"Buddy, we can't tell Mom and Lily about this, okay? It might scare them too much."
Max, still shaking, nodded his agreement, his eyes reflecting a mix of fear and confusion. The next night, John braced himself as he decided to stay with Max that night, telling Emily that Max needed his company. He hoped the previous night's incident was just a bad dream, a trick of the light, or his imagination. But in the dimly lit room around midnight, the atmosphere felt heavy again, charged with sinister energy. Max's look-alike ghost appeared with the same eerie grin plastered on his face. John's heart sank. He embraced Max, trying to think about what to do, but this time, the encounter was even more terrifying. The ghostly apparition is now enraged. Its face is twisted and it screamed with a sense of loss and anger. Its eyes, hollow and dark, bore into John's soul. The room grew colder, and the air thick with the ghost's fury. The screams were deafening, reverberating off the walls and sending chills down John's spine. Max, hearing the screams, began to cry uncontrollably, his body shaking. John quickly pulled him out from the room, his mind racing with fear and confusion.
Why was this happening? And why could only he and Max see this ghost?
Emily and Lily remained oblivious to the nightly terror. They noticed John and Max seemed tense, quiet, and Emily noticed that Max was terrified, but attributed it to the stress of moving. Emily would sometimes catch glimpses of worry in John's eyes, but whenever she asked, he responded,
Stressed about work, the renovation, and where to start.
As the nights progressed, the encounters with the ghost became more intense. Objects in the Max's room would move on their own. His bedroom door would slam shut without any wind, and an eerie feeling lingered in the air. The ghost's presence was always accompanied by a drop in temperature, a sign that the terror was about to begin. John and Max were exhausted, both mentally and physically. They were living in constant fear, unsure of how to deal with this malevolent spirit. The ghost seemed trapped in a cycle of anger and despair, unable to move on, and determined to make its presence felt. The screams of the ghost echoed in their minds even during the day. The house, once a symbol of a new beginning, had become a prison of fear and despair. John knew they couldn't go on like this. They needed to find out why this spirit was haunting them and how to help it find peace. But little did they know, the truth behind the ghost's anger and the secrets of the house were darker and more terrifying than they could ever imagine. The haunting in Max's room had grown increasingly intense, a chilling reminder of the unsolved mystery lurking within the walls of the Thompson family's new home. John, driven by a need to understand and protect his family, begins researching the history of the house. He visits the local library, talks to longtime residents of the area, and searches through old newspaper archives. Through his research, he discovers that the house was once home to a family whose son, Benjamin, eerily similar in age to Max, mysteriously disappeared decades ago. The more John learns, the more disturbed he becomes. He uncovers old police reports and newspaper articles about the missing boy, revealing that the disappearance was never solved, and the family eventually left the house heartbroken. Locals speak of the house being cursed since then, with several subsequent owners leaving abruptly after reporting strange occurrences, all the while keeping his wife Emily and daughter Lily shielded from the terrifying reality. For some reason, they still can't hear the ghostly screams at night. Each night, Benjamin, the ghostly boy confined to Max's room, revealed his presence in unsettling ways. His mournful wails and angry screams filled the space, creating an atmosphere of dread and sorrow. Despite his initial fear, Max found himself drawn to the troubled spirit. Through disjointed whispers and spectral expressions, a bond began to form between the living boy and the restless ghost. John, increasingly concerned about the impact of these events on his family, especially Max, decided to seek help. He reached out to Mrs. Greenwald, a spiritual medium known for her delicate handling of such otherworldly matters. This decision, however, he kept secret, fearing the truth would be too overwhelming for his family, especially Emily. Mrs. Greenwald's first attempt to communicate with Benjamin was a storm of supernatural activity. The room flickered with erratic lights, objects moved as if by an invisible hand, and Benjamin's screams echoed, steeped in fear and defiance. Yet, amidst this chaos, Mrs. Greenwald remained calm, her voice a soothing presence in the tempest. Gradually, her patience bore fruit. Benjamin's demeanor shifted, his fear giving way to a cautious willingness to communicate. He spoke in hushed tones, his words a mixture of confusion and longing. His memories were fragmented, shadowed by the mystery of his last day, playing near the woods, the sudden appearance of strangers, and an overwhelming sense of fear. Intrigued and moved by Benjamin's story, John, Max, and Mrs. Greenwald formed a silent pact. They would delve into the history of the house and any clues about the nearby woods, hoping to unearth the truth about Benjamin's fate. This mission, they agreed, would remain hidden from Emily and Lily, a protective veil to spare them from the haunting reality. In the dimly lit confines of Max's room, the ghostly figure of Benjamin had become a haunting constant in the Thompson household. Nightly, his spectral form flickered in the shadows, his voice a harrowing blend of piercing screams and desperate, hushed whispers. The air grew colder with each outburst, a chilling testament to the agony he once endured. Amidst these chilling episodes, Benjamin managed to convey fragments of his past. He whispered,
"Ancient tree, gnarled roots, a moss-covered rock. Ancient tree, gnarled roots, a moss-covered rock. It is here. The truth is hidden."
John, torn between calling the authorities and embarking on a personal quest for truth, found himself drawn into the dense, unwelcoming woods. Guided by Benjamin's vague directions, he searched for any kind of tree that matches his description, with roots twisted in silent agony. Under the thick blanket of leaves and the weight of time, John found nothing but the haunting silence of the forest. That night, an anguished scream from Benjamin echoed through the room, hinting at a location near the moss-covered rock. Armed with a shovel and a resolve steeled by desperation, John returned to the site. There, he unearthed the grim reality of Benjamin's fate, a collection of bones, a silent scream from the past. The shock of the discovery overwhelmed John. He fell. The bones lying before him were a stark reminder of the fragility of life. He imagined his own son, Max, in a similar fate, and a wave of sorrow and dread washed over him. Rushing back, he alerted the local police and with a heavy heart disclosed the entire ordeal to Emily. Her reaction was a mix of shock and a protective embrace for Max, realizing the depth of the fear and pain he had been silently enduring. The police, skeptical yet intrigued, investigated the site. Not far from the grave, they uncovered a rusted locket, an object that seemed out of place, yet intimately connected to the tragedy. The locket, possibly left in a hasty attempt to hide the crime, became a crucial piece of evidence in unraveling Benjamin's story. Back home, the atmosphere was fraught with tension. Benjamin's presence grew more intense, his form flickering with an urgent energy. He seemed drawn to the locket, a symbol of his unfinished story. He screamed,
The locket, the locket. Find them, find them."
The police, while struggling to digest John's extraordinary tale of ghostly guidance, could not ignore the tangible evidence before them. Max's confirmation of the events added a layer of credibility to the unbelievable narrative. As John and Max delved deeper into the mystery, they realized their journey was far from over. Benjamin, still unrested, now conveyed a sense of desperation. His screams were not just for justice, but also a plea for closure, a longing to bring peace to his parents and himself. The haunting mystery that enveloped the Thompson household was nearing its resolution. That night, as John and Max sat in Max's dimly lit room, the ghostly figure of Benjamin appeared once more. Amidst his usual unsettling presence, he whispered a name that would become the key to unraveling the final piece of the puzzle.
Aunt Tracy, locket, Aunt Tracy.
John relayed this cryptic message to the lead detective on the case. The detective's investigation uncovered a startling connection. The locket, once thought to be a mere clue, was identified as part of a collection stolen from the Thompsons' neighbors over a decade ago during an armed robbery. The thieves, now incarcerated for their crimes, were confronted with this new evidence. One of the criminals, burdened by guilt, confessed to a crime far more heinous than theft. He admitted to killing Benjamin, fearing the young boy had witnessed their robbery and could identify them. This confession brought a grim clarity to the tragic story of Benjamin's untimely death. As the pieces of the tragic puzzle came together, Benjamin shared another longing whisper. He missed his parents, especially his mother. The detective informed John that they had located Benjamin's father in a different state. Tragically, Benjamin's mother had passed away shortly after her son's disappearance, a loss born of unendurable sadness. The revelation of Benjamin's fate hit his father like a thunderbolt. Overwhelmed with shock and grief, he spoke with John over the phone, his voice breaking with tears. He promised to take the first flight back to put his son's remains to rest. Benjamin's father joined John and Max in the room that had witnessed so many eerie encounters. They waited in silence, the room growing colder, the lights flickering in anticipation. As Benjamin appeared, his usual screams filled the air, but something changed when he saw his father. Recognition, relief, and a sense of peace washed over his spectral form. For a moment, time stood still. Benjamin looked at his father, a final acknowledgement of love and farewell. Then, as if released from the chains of his earthly turmoil, he disappeared, his presence fading away, leaving behind a serene stillness. The room, once a site of fear and mystery, was now just a room. The icy chill dissipated, the light steadied, and a sense of closure enveloped the space. Benjamin finally found peace,